Rain poured mercilessly over the city, drenching the streets in silver sheets that blurred the neon lights and washed the world in gray. Emily stood on the marble steps of the luxurious hotel, her cheap dress clinging to her trembling body, every droplet slicing through the thin fabric like needles. Her hair stuck to her face, her lips quivering as she stared at the tall figure standing in front of her. Adrian Blackwood, the CEO every headline called the man with an empire built on ice. He looked impossibly calm, his tailored black suit untouched by the chaos of the storm. Around them, guests whispered, hiding their curiosity behind umbrellas, pretending not to stare at the scandal unfolding before their eyes. Emily's voice cracked as she finally spoke, the words catching in her throat before escaping in a trembling whisper that carried more desperation than the rain itself. "Act like you love me, please." The words hit the air like lightning. Behind her, Daniel, the man who once swore he loved her, stood with his new girlfriend on his arm, smirking. His laughter sliced through her pride like a blade. "Still begging, Emily?" He sneered, his tone dripping with mockery. "You haven't changed." Pathetic as always. The laughter of his new lover followed, soft and poisonous. Emily's nails dug into her palms until she felt the sting of pain. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the rain. But something inside her refused to bow this time. Her body trembled, not just from cold, but from humiliation and rage that clawed its way through her chest. She needed to prove she wasn't the same broken girl he left behind. Her eyes, shimmering with tears and stormlight, met Adrian's, and she repeated louder this time, each word trembling but fierce, "Please, act like you love me." For a heartbeat, silence fell. Adrian's sharp gray eyes flickered with something unreadable. He didn't move at first, didn't speak. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. The sound of his polished shoes against the wet marble echoed in the night. He reached out, removed his black coat, and draped it over her shoulders with slow precision, his touch careful, deliberate. The warmth of the fabric surrounded her like a fragile shield against the cold. Adrian's deep voice broke through the sound of rain. Steady, low, commanding. "She's mine." The words fell like thunder, silencing every whisper around them. Daniel's smirk faltered, confusion and disbelief twisting across his face. "Yours?" he repeated, scoffing. "You expect me to believe?" Adrian cut him off with a single glance. His expression was unreadable, his tone calm but laced with danger. "Believe what you want, but next time you try to humiliate her, remember who you're standing." The next morning, the entire office buzzed like a hive of restless bees. Whispers traveled faster than emails. Every assistant, intern, and manager in Blackwood Enterprises had heard the same shocking rumor. The CEO was dating his assistant. Emily could feel every stare on her back as she stepped out of the elevator, clutching the folder against her chest like a shield. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. She hadn't slept all night, replaying the scene in the rain over and over. The weight of Adrian's coat, the sound of his voice declaring, "She's mine." It had been an act. It had to be, and yet the look in his eyes hadn't felt like an act at all. As she walked past her coworkers, snippets of whispered gossip followed her like shadows. "Did you see them together last night?" He actually put his coat on her, like a movie. Seen? She must have done something to catch his attention. The cruel tone stung, but she didn't respond. She just kept walking, head high, though her hands trembled with every step. When she reached her desk, Adrian's secretary appeared beside her, expressionless as always. "Mr. Blackwood wants you in his office now." Emily froze. Her pulse spiked. Everyone turned to look as she made her way to the glass-walled office at the end of the corridor, where Adrian sat behind his desk, reviewing documents as if nothing in the world had changed. The moment she stepped inside, he lifted his gaze. "Close the door," he said. His voice was calm even, but it carried that quiet power that made people obey without question. She did as told, her throat dry. "Sir, about last night," she started, but he interrupted without looking up. "The board will be here in an hour." "You'll be joining me," she blinked. "Joining you? But why?" He finally looked up, his eyes locking on hers. "Because if we're going to make them believe this story, we do it properly." Her heart skipped. The story. So he was going to keep pretending. Before she could protest, he stood, buttoning his suit jacket with smooth precision, and walked past her, stopping close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne. Sharp, clean, and dangerously addictive. "I don't like scandals," he said quietly. "If this gets out of control, it could damage the company, so we'll handle it, together." He looked down at her, his tone softening just slightly. "Unless you've changed your mind about pretending?" She swallowed hard. "No," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." A small, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Good." Later during the meeting, he played the role perfectly. His hand rested casually over hers as he explained projections to the board. Every glance, every subtle gesture. By the third day, the entire company treated Emily differently. The same co-workers who used to ignore her now smiled too sweetly. Their greetings dipped in fake politeness. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends, acquaintances, even strangers asking, "Is it true? Are you really with Adrian Blackwood?" She didn't know what to answer. Every time she typed a reply, her fingers froze over the keyboard. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? What started as a desperate request in the rain had turned into a full-blown illusion she couldn't control. Every coffee break, every shared elevator ride with Adrian became fuel for gossip. Every glance between them turning into rumors that spread like wildfire. That morning she entered his office with trembling hands, trying to focus on her work. But the scent of his cologne filled the air, wrapping around her like invisible threads she couldn't escape. Adrian sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, his attention fixed on his laptop. The sharp contrast between his calm focus and her chaotic thoughts made her chest tighten. "You're late," he said without looking up. "Only 2 minutes," she murmured, avoiding his gaze. 2 minutes matter when people are watching. His tone was smooth but carried an edge that made her pulse quicken. "They're already talking enough. Let's not give them a reason to think you're careless." She bit her lip, swallowing the wave of embarrassment. "I didn't ask for this attention," she whispered. He finally looked at her, his gaze piercing. "You did when you asked me to act." His words hit her harder than he realized. She wanted to argue, to remind him she hadn't meant this. Not the fake dates. Not the endless speculation. Not the ache that came from pretending to be loved by someone so untouchable. But before she could speak, he stood and walked toward her. His presence filled the room like heat. "Do you regret it?" he asked, voice low. She froze, her heart hammering. She began, but the words stuck in her throat. "Good," he interrupted softly, stepping even closer. "Because I don't." His confession, or what sounded like one, left her speechless. For a moment, she forgot the difference between real and pretend. He leaned down, close enough that she could feel his breath brush her ear. "Tonight there's a charity gala. You'll be there with me." It wasn't a question. It was a command. Her pulse raced. "Adrian, people will talk more." "Let them," he cut her off. His tone suddenly cold again. "If we're going to play this game, we do it convincingly." The gala was a storm of glittering chandeliers, champagne laughter, and people pretending to care about causes they barely understood. Emily stood beside Adrian, her arm linked through his as photographers snapped photos from every angle. The flashes blinded her, but his calm presence anchored her amid the chaos. He moved with effortless confidence, greeting business partners and shaking hands with politicians as though he owned not just the room, but everyone in it. Every time someone addressed her as Ms. Blackwood, her heart stumbled, and Adrian didn't correct them. He didn't even hesitate, and instead he leaned closer, whispering something that sounded like praise, his breath brushing her neck just long enough to send shivers racing down her spine. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple, the untouchable billionaire and the woman who'd somehow captured his cold heart. Hours passed and the act never cracked. When they finally sat at their table, surrounded by murmuring guests, Emily tried to steady her shaking hands. The soft music, the flickering candlelight, and the steady rhythm of his presence made her dizzy. "You don't have to keep pretending," she whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the noise of crystal glasses clinking. Adrian turned his head slowly, his gaze locking with hers. "You asked me to act," he said softly. "I'm doing exactly that." His tone was calm, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface, something she couldn't quite read. "It's too much," she said, lowering her eyes. "Everyone's watching. They'll think—" "Good," he interrupted, his lips curling into a faint smile. "That's the point." For a moment she wanted to argue, but then his hand brushed hers beneath the table, slow, deliberate, electric. "You don't understand what this is doing to me," she murmured, her chest tightening. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what it's doing to me." The words stopped her breath. The crowd around them blurred, their laughter fading into distant echoes. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They burned with something raw, something she hadn't seen before. "Adrian," she breathed, but he only smiled faintly. A rare, almost fragile expression. "You wanted me to act like I love you," he said, his tone low, intimate. "What if I don't want to act anymore?" The world seemed to freeze around them. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She searched his face for a hint of mockery, but found none, only honesty, terrifying and beautiful. "You don't mean that," she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. "Don't I?" The silence between them stretched thick with everything they weren't saying. Then as the music swelled, days later the illusion had spread far beyond the walls of the company. Magazines printed their photos from the gala. "The untouchable CEO finally in love," headlines screamed. Emily couldn't escape it. Strangers stared when she walked down the street, whispering her name as though it belonged to someone else. Yet amid the chaos, something inside her had changed. She no longer trembled when she entered the office, no longer hid from the whispers. She stood taller, spoke with confidence, and met every gaze head-on. The woman who once begged for someone to pretend to love her now carried the quiet strength of someone who knew her worth. But she still couldn't forget the look in Adrian's eyes that night, the words he'd said as they danced. "What if I don't want to act anymore?" They haunted her. Every time she saw him, she searched for a sign, a flicker of truth behind the mask. But he was Adrian Blackwood, always composed, always unreadable. One morning, Daniel appeared at her office door. The sight of him froze her in place. Gone was the arrogance that once defined him. He looked smaller now, desperate. "Emily," he said softly, stepping closer. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have left you." His voice cracked as he spoke, his hands trembling. "That man, he doesn't love you. He's just using you for the headlines." She stared at him, stunned, as the man who once laughed at her now pleaded for her forgiveness. "You think you can come back because you're jealous?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "You had your chance, Daniel." He tried to reach for her hand, but before he could, another voice filled the doorway, low, controlled, unmistakable. "She doesn't need to beg anymore." Adrian stood there, his expression unreadable, but his presence enough to make Daniel step back instantly. His eyes flicked to Emily, softening just slightly. "We're done here," he said coldly to Daniel. Without another word, Daniel turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Silence settled between them, heavy and electric. Adrian stepped closer, his hand finding the small of her back. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "Yes, I did," he replied quietly. "Because the truth is, Emily, I stopped pretending a long time ago." Her breath caught. The wall she'd built to protect herself began to crumble. "Adrian," she whispered, not trusting her voice. He reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that shattered her resolve. "You wanted me to act like I loved you," he said softly. "But every time you looked at me, every time you smiled, I forgot it was supposed to be an act." Her heart felt like it was breaking open, every piece rearranging itself around him. "So what now?" she asked, her voice trembling. He smiled faintly, the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. "Now we stop pretending." In that moment, the world outside didn't matter, not the rumors, not the